Hello. Time for quiz number 3. Like the other two quizzes you took. These will be 30 multiple choice and true false questions. Now, I talk about uh, the questions. I talk about a lot of other things in between. Kind of another way to talk about the novel with you. But indeed, if you take notes again, and if you've from here, and if you've read the book carefully, listened to the introductory video, you should do well on the quiz. There's nothing sneaky here, just material that plays into what's important in the novel, some of the major themes, for instance. Now, one of the big things in these YA novels is, of course, the age of the characters, and you're going to find that Cassie, as Cassia is 17, and that's the time that she's going to her matched banquet and to be married at 21. Of course, in this story, that kind of thing is just something that maybe took place in the past. Marriage, all the social contracts and stuff, since the society has been completely annihilated in most respects, lowering people to the level of survivors. It's a pure survival. It's a very violent world, and Cassie enters that world at the age of 16. Um, so she's very young. Um, um, Ben is young. Kevin Hunter Walker may just be a little older. Ringer is very young. Someone like Teacup is 7 or 8. The youngest age on which you can go on a military expedition in this crazy world that's the remnants of the first 3 and 4 waves of the alien invasion after the arrival. Now, Cassie's name is, her actual name is Cassiopeia, is named after one of the constellations. And the stars in the sky is kind of a hopeful thing. I believe her name means she whose words excel. But she goes by Cassie, uh, and you get to know her quite well. Now, unfortunately, of course, these characters kill if necessary, and I always get mixed up is that the first person, and I wrote Cassia here, as you can see, and I wrote Cassie after reading these novels when I made the first quiz, so I had to go through and make a couple alterations. But Cassie is, when I always think that the one that bothers her the most is that when she kills the soldier who has the crucifix in his hand. She'll come to realize later on that the person who shot that guy dead was, of course, Evan Walker, the silencer. But that wasn't the first person that she had killed, as matters turn out. The first person she kills has a rifle in his hand, which is when at the ash pit, and he had just killed Priority One, had just killed the young boy who had flirted with Cassie, and she shoots him right in the forehead, because when she lifts the mask and everything, they had 3 eyes. So that was the first person she killed. The one with the crucifix was the second. It's a heavy stuff for a young girl of 16 years old. Grow up quickly, as they say. Now, the arrival is the day, and those spaceships linger in the sky. And if you look at Independence Day, you'll get that image. And Independence Day probably took that image from Childhood's End, another alien invasion with a different twist. On the 10th day of the arrival, the first wave to attack humans was a massive electromagnetic pulse, EMP, knocks out power grids everywhere. If you have a massive one, then you can imagine what that would do to everyday life. Everything, we don't even think of after a while how important electricity is to us. And it's not just electricity, it's the way things run. Cars won't work anymore, planes fall from the sky. Um, it just undoes all the electronics um, and leaves the world quite vulnerable. There is a novel, I can't remember the name of it right now, that may well turn into a movie where the Russians use a massive EMP attack on the United States and the country kind of falls apart. And then, everybody fighting with everybody in isolated pockets, which the aliens would really like, as you can tell from their disposition. Um, Now, the book does open with that interesting quotation that I mentioned in the beginning um, of the introductory video for the novel. If aliens ever visited us, and most people, do have the idea that if they did, well, they would be much more advanced than us. But I guess our man Stephen Hawking is a physicist who suffered for decades from ALS, and it was the subject of a recent film, The Theory of Everything. And he has a less optimistic view of what would happen, and he says, "I think the outcome would be much as when Columbus first landed in America." And he says that didn't go very well for Native Americans in Central America, South America, and North America, and that is absolutely true. And these aliens are perhaps even more malignant, as you come to find reading the novel. I look at all these times I've enjoyed in the last two books the sort of new vocabulary. And here we have the Red Tsunami and the Red Death. And it refers, of course, to the horrible plague of the third wave. And the reason, for instance, that Cassia doesn't like birds because it was a kind of an avian flu. They created the virus and used birds as the natural carriers, birds who outnumber humans throughout the world and are everywhere where people live, from penguins to crows. And they carry this plague that devastated the population. I think by the end of the third wave, 97% of the people all over the world are dead. And that is why there's just the smell of death everywhere. And one of the reasons you don't want to go near a city uh, because of everything that lingers there. Now, at Camp Ashpit, where Cassia, her father, and Sammy go, Sammy's father, Sammy and Cassie's father isn't buying in on everything. As a matter of fact, they were thinking of leaving. Of course, they were going to go to the Air Force Base, they ended up in the same place anyway. But it's there that Cassia's father gives her first a loaded semi-automatic Luger, and then later he shows her where there's an M16. And remember, when Lieutenant Colonel or Colonel Vosh, he's in charge of the convoy from Wright-Patterson that comes to Camp Ashpit to gather the children and to kill the parents, is Colonel Vosh. It's probably Lieutenant Colonel Vosh, but no matter. And we learn from Aaron that later on that he is, in fact, the lead alien infested human on the face of the earth. That's how big the operation at the Wright-Patterson base is. And at any rate, he is the one who Cassie sees put a bullet into her father's head. They've killed everybody except the children. They're on the bus, and just by chance, Cassie's went away in search of the other boy. Crisco was his name. And when the two soldiers come after Cassie, and she hides in the pit of the bones and everything of the people who have been burned after they died, and she overhears them say, "Don't worry, the eye will take care of her." And that refers to it looks like a small gray globe. When it's activated, actually it's from CO2 and whatnot, it pulses into green and then green yellow, and it destroys, it levels the area around the camp, just wiping out all evidence of anything, as though it just wasn't there in many respects. Um, Now, and we go to the camp. Basically, the novel mostly is with Cassie, but also features the boy of her dreams from high school, the football player Ben Parrish, um, and she had a crush. It was the is now called Zombie, as she'll come to find out later in the novel. And it's called Zombie is because Resnick gives the people names: Pound Cake, um, Ringer. All these people have these names to further distance them from who they were as when they were human. As Vosh tells Ben, "I'm going to empty you and put you back together." But anyway, there is a place in the poem they call him Zombie because he's one of the few who survives the plague, and because he survived the plague and the ward, in fact, where they keep the contaminated is called the zombie ward. And I guess if you can die, you go zombie, which is you can use your imagination. But that becomes his nom de guerre, if you will, his war name. He is zombie. Um, at the camp too, and this is one of those ones you have to wonder about, and certainly Ringer does. The Wonderland, the Wonderland refers to as a piece of alien infested technology that somehow maps, among other things, the human brain, including an individual's memory, and it gets uploaded, I assume, to the mothership. And I mean, look at if you think about it, and this is what Ringer thinks about it, is that how the heck did did the army, of all things, get a hold of this alien technology? And of course, the answer is that they're aliens. Um, and Evan tells this to Cassie, and eventually Ringer will convince uh, zombie Ben that in fact those people aren't humans, and they're not working for the humans, but they're part of what's going to end up being the fifth wave. Um, but Ben's lost his poor sister, Sissy. He wears a locket around his neck, very vulnerable, and as he says, emptied and filled, and in at the base where he survives the plague, Ben Parrish, who becomes zombie, eventually actually comes to view Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vosh as his savior. It's pretty heavy, but I mean, that's the kind of bond that's developed among the warriors facing this tremendous and powerful enemy. Um, Now, the other one, when we go back to Cassie, and we remember that she gets shot. Um, she's been living in a tent, sleeping with a little bear in her M16. Um, and one of the silencers, she's walking the street and she sees some people, I think three, who've been killed, headshots. And then she's shot in a leg and goes underneath the car. And then she learns a lot about Evan Walker, and who turns out to be the silencer who shot Cassie and ran from her when she refused to run. She stood up by the car, um, and then from him, eventually she learns more about who he actually is, and he is, and goes back and talks about the thing called the awakening. And this is when the implanted, downloaded, if you will, alien consciousness activate and absorb their human hosts. And this, all the women who are pregnant when this event occurs, um, they have a kind of a dreams of an owl coming, maybe a great horned. I can't remember what the specific owl might have been, but is the the kind of thing that's in there to mask what any kind of memory that might be there about what happened and how the alien consciousness entered the brain of the fetus and in fact grows there. And this idea of consuming the individual is one of the centerpieces of a lot of science fiction. And I may have mentioned in the other video, for instance, uh, the what was the movie? Oh yes, the invasion of the body snatchers, and this fear, particularly in the United States, is this loss of individuality that comes in here. And so what you have with Evan Walker is a nice, if you look at it, his conflict, um, and he's a member of amongst the groups of the aliens who don't all agree that they think that a lot of them thought that the humans and the aliens could in fact live together, and that faction lost out. But Evan is one of those ones we haven't met anymore, who in fact is drawn to the human side, and one of it is when Cassie refuses him, just says and says, "Go ahead and shoot me and get it over with," and she doesn't run, but he does, and then he eventually um, tells her that she saved him. That, but she's suspicious. I mean, one thing about Cassie is she's smart. You have to be to survive. It's not quite like Shipbreaker, but it is in a way. You have to be lucky and smart, and you have to learn from experience. But she looks at him and he says, "Well, I worked on a farm and whatnot," and she feels attracted to him. He's a nice looking young man. Um, she's attracted to him, and then he did save her life after she was shot. But she remains uncertain about his claims that he grew up on a farm because, well, he has impeccable cuticles and soft hands, and somehow that just doesn't go with working hard on a farm. Um, and Evan Walker, eventually, the truth comes out because he slips up and says things like, it turns out he knows a hell of a lot about Cassie, and including the name of her crush, Ben Parrish. And the reason is that he had stalked her as the silencer, and while she lived in the tent, and had actually read her diary, which of course is embarrassing to her because she had in that one admitted that she never went out with Ben Parrish, but when she talks to him, she's trying to sound a little more experienced than she actually is. Now, Sammy, of course, goes on the bus, and that's where the medic, supposedly the medic Parker, has his he has the Red Cross sign, and gives them all some juice to eat and gummy bears. And there's what's going on the bus, of course, is they're going to Camp Haven, uh, and there, on the way there, they keep telling everybody, "Oh, you're perfectly safe." And so they think he does protest too much, and even I imagine someone even as young as Sammy would be wondering, "Why do you keep telling me this?" But Camp Haven is, in fact, a concentration camp. Now, at Camp Haven, Parker has a silver disc, and if it on the way there is what's happening is a triage. Um, there's if you he says you're red, then you're going to live, and you go and sit in the circle, and you're given a name, and you go in, and you meet uh, Dr. Pam, the wonderful woman. Even she's just so friendly. Zombie LeBen likes her, um, and I think even before she basically kills her, um, Cassie even is like, well, she's a very nice person. But at any rate, if you supposedly glow red though, a green then you're separated, as the young girl Margaret will be, and you suffer a not good fate there. Most of them are just killed, older or whatever, for whatever reason. We really don't know. Um, we do learn, though, if you get the pellet put in the back of the head. Invaders from Mars is the movie from that's referring to in some ways that the title I couldn't remember earlier this morning. And in those, they put a device in the back of your head, and the aliens take over your consciousness. This particular pellet not only, of course, lets people know where you are, but if you learn outside of Dayton, Resnick has a thing with all the pellets in there, and if he pushes the button, it'll kill you. So it's a locator, but it's also a weapon, and that's in fact how Dr. Pam dies, because she doesn't know that the pellet is implanted on her, and she presses the button and kills herself. And so green is not necessarily a good color in this one. Okay, I believe I got cut off when I was talking about Camp Haven. And what happens there to people, and the drill sergeant role is usually, a complete hard ass, and so this is kind of a conventional role here. Although in Zombie, calls him an equal opportunity sadist, is a sadist. He just enjoys inflicting pain. And he doesn't realize, in fact, how true that is, because, of course, he's not what you would call human anyway. He's working for the aliens. But this is a sort of a stereotypical drill sergeant, the kind that you've seen in numerous movies, who yells at everybody. His favorite word is maggot. I was called that when I was in basic training, so I remember quite well. Now, according to Dr. Pam, who eventually will die, she shows infested to Sammy and Ben. The infested, and they're called Teds, are marked with bright green circles on their foreheads. And in fact, Ben kills a guy he knew, because she's telling him that they glow green if you look at them, and there's a spot, you can see there's like this tentacles and whatnot. And so part of the indoctrination, in a sense, is that he kills someone, and you assume that this happens to basically everybody who comes through. You want to see an alien, little Sammy? Anyway, so again, more of the interesting dialogue in there. As I said, and it's an interesting concept. So everybody's under a lot of pressure. And then when the young men and women, and then all no older than 18, such as Tank, whom Resnick and the others train, when they become psychologically unbalanced, they're said to go Dorothy, or to look for the wizard. But to go Dorothy means to go over the deep end, but it also means, and we suspect that maybe with Tank, this is exactly what happened, that he starts to see through the Potemkin village, if you will, and starts asking too many questions and can't deal with the conflicts between what he begins to think and what he's told, and the toll on them is psychological in part, and they seem to have a breakdown, but they don't seem to come back from it either. And they say, "Go, Dorothy," and of course, the Colonel tells Ben that Tank had died from an overdose, but of course, they kill him. And just get rid of anybody you don't need. Now they go on a mission after all the training and all the other things. The Zombie and Ringer. Zombie's now the sergeant, and Ringer is the great shot, who used to be in charge of another unit but was sent over to help this particular unit do better. But outside Dana, one of when they're in the battle and Ringer finally, it dawns on her, let's just say some of her suspicions are confirmed, and she demands that Zombie remove the pellet that Dr. Pam had inserted from her neck, and then you realize that if you remove the pellet, you glow green. Now, the pellet keeps you from having the glow, probably too, has to do with it infrared at night with your night goggles or whatever, this device that they have on there. Normal humans glow green. But if you have the pellet, that's one of the other things it does. It makes you not glow, and that's what thing they found out, that Resnick, in fact, is sniping on them. He's been sent along to monitor the situation. This is a test because they're the first squadron. And the device that's in Resnick's hands when Ringer kills him, it allows him to locate and kill the soldiers because of the pellets implanted in their necks. And that was the reason that Resnick did not glow green in Ringer's and Zombie's sensors, because he had a pellet. And so they were wondering, well, who the hell is this guy who's up in this building taking shots at us? And Ringer and Zombie decide to take him out, and they do. Now, Ben/Zombie decides to return to Camp Haven alone to rescue Sammy/Nugget. And Ringer shoots him in the leg to make it look like he was wounded, and to add to his story that the colonel doesn't necessarily believe. So that he could say, well, everybody got killed but me. And of course he doesn't have a pellet. There's a lot of he has some answers for this, but Resnick's dead, and he's going to go back alone to be able to get Sammy because he's promised. And of course, Cassie's going towards Camp Haven too, with Evan, with or without Evan, because she's made a similar progress. So these two arcs, the major arcs of the narrative, come together with these two characters. Now, Evan calls Cassie his own name, which is Mayflower. For these birds are both pretty and they can fly. And there's this image of flight. By the way, we had that in Matched too with Cassia. The image of flight is kind of a hopeful image in this in our novel now. And this one is the devastation. There's a mayflies. If you've ever looked at them, they're very, very delicate and pretty. And of course, they can fly above the water when they hatch. It's quite a thing to see. Now, on the way to Camp Haven with Cassie, Evan and she run into more of the enemy. People are out to kill humans, and there's a grenade blast, and Evan gets nastied, but he manages, which Cassie just blows her away. He managed to dispatch with the 4 enemy soldiers, so he's an enhanced body because he is an alien, and he has super strength. He can go very, very, very quickly, and he's absolutely dangerous and a killer. There's no question about that. That's a part of the alien part of him that he has to grow to live with. Now, we learn more about the aliens from Evan. This is one of the interesting twists here, that the aliens have no bodies. They're disembodied consciousness. They're pure consciousness. And they've been that way for, 10,000 years or something, is that when they left their planet, they gave up their bodies. So they're infesting the humans because, in a sense, they can't come down by themselves because they're just data. if you will. And this is what the Wonderland thing does, would seem, is to map human everything and turn them into, in many respects, pure data. So they have to use human hosts, which raises the question that's not answered. Well, then if you're going to, why are you here? If you're going to kill off every human, and what hosts are going to use, things along these lines. We don't know the answer to those questions. And I'm almost finished with the second book in the series of 3, and I don't know the answer yet. And another interesting thing happens is, if any of you have ever seen, let's see, Ron Howard directed it, and it's Don Amici and some other, and the aliens come looking for eggs that they have left behind, and one of the characters is quite attracted to Raquel Welch's daughter, and the eggs that are in this pool rejuvenate a lot of the old people. That's part of what goes on. But one of the things that happen is they have a kind of an encounter in the swimming pool, and it's her way of being romantic. And I know and this light swears all over the place and then nails him. He goes, oh my God, if this is foreplay, I'm a dead man. Well, what happens with Cassie and Evan says, I love you. He says that a lot, and she's obviously very, very attracted to him, despite the fact of his otherness, if you will. She melds with Evan, and this is sort of he enters her consciousness, and she jokes about it as being kind of this Vulcan melding, or in the second book, don't do that to me, this melding. You're not going to get away with it. But he does then, and it does say that she melds with Evan, and I like the imagery because it says she opens up like a flower to the rain. Very nice, very nice. It's not a bee image. It's not as sexual as that, but the idea is that those two have a kind of a bond that's not open in most respects to regular humans. And at the end of the narrative, Ben and Cassie and Sammy, they run from that pulsing bomb. The whole place is blowing up, and it seems that Evan is helping blow things up. And Ringer arrives in a Humvee, and they drive off, not knowing where Evan is, and they're laying the foundations for the second novel. The young children that are allowed to live, Major Bob says, well, we're going to all go in an airplane, and there is a big transport, and the colonel assumingly is still alive, and we don't know where they're heading now, but the drones all fall from the sky, and there's a massive explosion because of one of these other bombs that they have. It turned green and then pulse and pulse and then white light, and so the Air Force Base is pretty much devastated. But we don't know where they've gone. Does seem like a major setback, however, and we don't know if Evan's alive. Yes, he is. He'll survive. I'm not sure how he did it, but he does. And everybody will go on and regroup with Pound Cake and everybody. They're going to all get ready for the adventures to come. Do a good job on the quiz. And next is another excellent book. Is How I Live Now, something else entirely.